So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this portion of the Grain to Glass seminar that the Common Grain Alliance is putting on, and we're really happy that you're here. My name is Shelley Sackier. I am the Director of Distillery Education here at Reservoir, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator for this afternoon's stellar gathering of brains and brawn and beauty. You figure out who's who. And our panelists will no doubt, of course, just blow you away with their engaging answers to all your keen questions and my probing queries. But before we do that, I have been given the opportunity to tell you a little bit about an experience, about a project that I am working on currently. So last year, I received grant funding from the Virginia Spirits Board. That is an organization and funding you will hear about shortly from one of our panelists. But I've been pursuing a project ever since then, and we've named it the Virginia Heritage Grain Project. So this, in essence, is a study of Virginia's historical grains in relation to the spirit industry. So we're looking at grains from the period of first contact, colonial and antebellum time periods, if we are so lucky. So this study is pertinent to our gathering here today because it revolves around partnership, and we as grain users, we don't have the privilege of being able to dictate what's on offer, right? So that is typically chosen by region, by climate, and oftentimes by the best ROI for those bringing the grains to market. So specifically from the distilling perspective, we are beginning to, many of us are beginning to realize that somewhere along the evolution of the development of crafting spirits, efficiency found its way in front of flavor, and when it came, specifically to making decisions about grain selection. So all of those factors that allowed grains to grow more cheaply, more fruitfully, and with less labor input somehow siphoned off a very critical component of consideration, and that is what we're making good or just good enough? Right? So the questions that this project is trying to answer are things like, are these historic flavors worthy of being literally unearthed, right? And where can we find them? And then what is the probability of farming success? A really, really important one. And then is it fiscally viable for farmers to be able to have fair compensation for the labors that they invest, the efforts that they put in with these grains? And to mirror that, will distillers or any other grain user see an ROI on their products? And then finally, very, very importantly, will there be an enthusiastic market of buyers for those products from those harvests? So that last part is particularly relevant, I think, as no matter how near and dear it is that we hold on to the flavor, hold on to savoring the flavors of the past. If the past tastes like shite, it's probably a very good reason why those varieties were kicked to the curb, right? So as this is a multi-year study, pending funding renewal, see all the people on the board here, the project is also multi-pronged. So there's the procurement of grains, there's the planting and harvesting of the grains, and then there's the distillation of the grains. And so each segment actually provides, critical data for us to assess the sagacity of moving forward into each new phase. So it's to save valuable time and, of course, to invest those funds judiciously, we are currently attempting to accomplish all three stages simultaneously. Oh my God. Yeah, albeit on a small scale. With the aid of seed savers and heritage grain organizations like Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, and with some wonderful agronomists through the USDA the germplasm, we are collecting seed. That is an ongoing pursuit. If any of you have any, see me afterward. So we are also working alongside with Virginia Tech, who is doing seed increase for us and small plot planting, and they're doing it in different Virginia locations so that we can, assess the success in different diverse regions and whatnot. And then we'll be doing the same thing we're starting this spring with some private farms who are going to be participating. And we're also going to be working with Clemson University's PD Research Center to do a lot of testing and to get some grain data there. And then lastly, we're also collaborating with the James Beam Institute of the University of Kentucky. And those folks are doing, we're utilizing their labs and doing small batch distillation of those grains. So we have currently 13 varieties of grain in the ground, growing skyward, looking pretty. So that's wheat and barley and rye that we have in the ground at the moment. And then we have 8 varieties of corn and wheat and rye at the lab in Kentucky, all being distilled as we speak. And so once all that is finished, we have nearly finished creating this incredible panel of industry experts within the distilling world who are then sent those samples. Then they make an assessment on that distillate as to whether or not they think it is worthy of barreling, right? So if it gets enough thumbs up from everybody, then those seeds go back into the small plot seed increase portion of the program. If it doesn't, it's kicked out of the project. So, as this is a state-funded grant, we anticipate making all the data that's collected within the study available to anybody who wants to utilize it, use it within their own frame of research or using ours, it doesn't matter. And ultimately, we just anticipate generating a network of farmers and all grain artisans, to connect growers to end users and help nurture a thriving historical grain economy. So if the project sounds interesting to you and you want to take part, whether that is from seed collection to farming or from the production room floor aspect or eventually to test kitchen ovens, we would love to have you on board, and I'm happy to give you more information. So thank you for your attention on that, as we're all so excited about it. But now, on to the panel for why you are all here. Let me first introduce all of them to you. We have Becky Harris here. She is the founder and chief distiller at Catoctin Creek Distillery in Purcellville, Virginia. And Becky is also the immediate past president and on the current board of the American Craft Spirits Association, specializing in government affairs. Becky also serves on the board of the Step Up Foundation, and this has been created to offer paid comprehensive internships in the spirit industry to underrepresented peoples. So we are incredibly lucky that she took this time out of her day in order to be here with us. Alongside her is Timmy Scott, the part owner and operator of the Glebe Farm in Warsaw, up in the Northern Neck. Now, Timmy's farm was passed on down from his grandfather, where they are now growing rye and a little bit of corn and some soybeans as well. But a really interesting thing that Timmy shared with, he schooled me on a few weeks back, was that the name of his farm, the Glebe, actually holds some really interesting historical context to it. So back in the earliest days when, all these colonies were first forming, a royal mandate was issued, of course, from the motherland, and that in light of giving a salary to colonial clergymen, they were allotted farmlands. So that was to supplement their income. And there were many, many glebes all about. I did not know this. I just think this is fascinating. I now have an answer for why I see that word around, back in England and Scotland, and then also here in Virginia. But, of course, as things typically do with the British Empire, things went pear-shaped. And once the revolution came about, they started scraping back all that land. So I think, Timmy has got some incredible history here, and if you want to hear more about it, definitely find him afterward. Next, we have Jeff Bloem, the founder of Murphy and Rood Malting Company in Charlottesville. Many of you already might know Jeff because he is a board member for the Common Grain Alliance, as well as on the Virginia Spirits Board. A busy guy, that's for sure. So Murphy and Rood emphasizes the brewing and distilling industry's connection with Virginia agriculture by sourcing all of its small grains from Virginia farmers. Now, I see Jeff as sort of like the middleman in between growers and users, so he just truly has his finger on the pulse of what is happening within the local supply chain here in Virginia. But not to put a blunt tip on it, but I just think that Jeff is probably like a master of flavor. So I'm especially excited for him here. And just beyond Jeff, we have Matt Harris of Harris Farms and also of Bay's Best Feed in Heathsville. So Bay's grains are all grown by by the local farms around them, and all folks who have been farming for generations, including their somewhat recently passed co-founder Billy Dawson, right? And he was determined to bring the hard work of local farmers to local users, and today Bay's directly sells all their grains to countless malt houses and breweries and distilleries and a bunch of other people all around our area. And of course, lastly to note, Matthew is also a member of the Virginia Spirits Board, so we're happy for him here too. And then lastly, but not least, we have Dave Cuttino. He's the founder of Reservoir Distillery, and he's the former chairman of the Virginia Spirits Board, where he was instrumental in establishing the research and education programs, which you will hear about shortly, and for what I am ever so grateful for. And Dave came to the world of whiskey via Wall Street, as one does, in 2008, where at some point he decided that he would rather convince people to sink their dosh into spirits instead of stocks. And since Dave also has himself a fancy engineering degree, he often finds himself spending a lot more time these days fixing mechanical failures than fixing himself a drink. So definitely have to change that too. So welcome to all of you. We're really glad that you're here to participate. And now, I specifically chose the four people flanking Jeff for a reason, because they're more than just folks who share a space within a crossover industry. They have a partnership, right? So Becky and Timmy on the end there they work as distiller and grain provider, as does Matthew and Dave. And as I could not fit all the countless individuals that you work with on the panel, Jeff, I thought you would just speak about relationships as they come to you. But I'd like to first pose a question, firstly to our farmers and distillers, is the one that is just really simple, right? How did you go about finding one another? So to tell us, what's the story of your now many years long partnership? So Becky, you want to start on your end with the mic?
Timmy, you found us. Timmy found us. Is this on? It's on? Okay. We actually, when we first started in 2009, we actually spent a few years going to Northern Virginia farm meetings, and talking about what we were going to do and what we wanted to build and getting local grain. We couldn't get any takers. You look at Northern Virginia, it's grapes, and then it was apples. And I mean, you look at kind of the dollar signs at that point, the small grains were fairly far down the list, and we just couldn't get anybody for years to talk to us. And so Timmy found us. So I'll let him tell how he found us.
I started growing rye and was looking for a different outlet to sell. And I don't want to butcher her name, Amy
Charmentaro.
There we go. Of the Virginia Distillers Association. I got in touch with her, and she gave me the name of 3 distilleries that used rye. And Scott was the only one who was interested.
He was happy.
Yeah, he was. And I think I had around October the 17th, we delivered our first batch.
Yeah.
Or October of 2017.
Yeah,
I delivered my first batch to Becky and Scott.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's been since then.
Yeah.
Beautiful partnership.
Good to hear. I'm hoping maybe these two will spice it up a bit by telling us how things went, horribly for them. Just for some variety, right? Okay, so grab a mic over there, Matt, and you and Dave tell us your romance, your bromance.
Yeah, so I think Dave and I, we've been working together for probably a couple years now, maybe 3 years. Me personally, I don't know.
I think it's actually longer than that.
Okay.
Because we reached out and found you.
Yeah.
And I was about to say, this is the person who actually found them. But I'll maybe go into a little bit of how, why we were like, Shelley, please go out and find these people. And it's not unlike what you're doing with the project right now with identifying farmers to grow certain things. But, you know, we started just a hair before Becky and Scott in 2008, and we actually went the route. It was difficult to find farmers back then, and believe it or not, we were actually sourcing our grain from southern states, and we were just like, "What do you got? Bring it in." In fact, we even they accidentally delivered ryegrass seed once, and we still distilled it. And it was actually pretty good. It was a great pepper thing to it. You know, the yield wasn't fantastic, but it's still like, you know. So, you know, back then, let's also keep in mind that when Becky and I started, craft was not a term yet. We were micro distilleries back then. Yeah. So we were just, you know, catch as catch can. But we developed some relationships, and we'll probably touch on this later. Relationships with your farmers is hugely important for a variety of reasons. And there were a number of guys that we had worked with, and we'd settled in on one particular farmer. And rye is a tricky beast to work with. And we had a period of time where the people that he was utilizing, because he grew corn and wheat, he didn't grow rye. So he's, you know, getting stuff from his neighbors. And they had a bad season, and we couldn't get any, and or it was going to be, I think, about 4 times what the normal cost would be. And that's when Shelley went out and really put together a database, kind of like, you know, what we're doing now. We'd just kind of fallen into this path of like just working with the people we're working, taking a little bit for granted that like, oh yeah, you know, things are working fine, and then until it doesn't. And so we're like, we need a database, and that's how we found Matt at that point, and he was extraordinarily helpful. Obviously, he saved the day that year.
Yeah. Thank you. No, anyway, like he was saying, I remember him reaching out. Luckily, as he mentioned, rye was something that's very, I would say, moody sometimes, more so than maybe wheat and barley. So we luckily had been working with 2 or 3 different rye farmers from different areas of Virginia, and you know, some regions, some areas of Virginia did well, and some didn't. And luckily, we had a little bit left over when they reached out, and that's kind of what kindled it.
I'll also add one thing, and I know this goes without saying for Becky as well. Our kind of catchphrase here is we're trying to answer the question, what does Virginia taste like? And we make a huge effort to try to have everything that we utilize come from Virginia, especially the grain. Like, I mean, you could go to the Dakotas and get rye, but we also view rye as probably having the most terroir effect of any of the grains. At least that's my personal opinion. And it's really, really important for us to work with farmers here because, again, knowing where it comes from, there's a lot of reasons why you want to know that. And I'm sure at some point I'll probably get asked a question like, Dave, tell us a time that things went really horribly wrong. And I've got some good stories.
I'd add to that, one of the other considerations is essentially ecological, if you will. It's shipping. You know, you're going far afield. It costs a lot of money to get that weight of grain to here. So there are really good economic arguments for looking local too. Now, in addition to flavor, there's also trying to make some money in a very tough business.
Good point. Jeff, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess apparently I did do this the hard way. So I think a good tip on finding growers, because believe it or not, when I had, you know, the crazy idea that there might be actually a viable business opportunity on the malting side of things. Before I designed the malt house, before I figured out how I was going to set up my facility, before I bought equipment, before I signed a lease, I was building my grower network. And so I think it's always first important to call it what it is, which is a network. I mean, these things will ebb and flow over years. You will have farmers that leave you and then potentially come back. Some will leave you and never come back. Some will stay with you forever. It's always going to revolve around what that previous harvest year was. I mean, I've had farmers come, go, come back, leave, and come back again. And it has a lot to do with whether they took a bath on that, 2018 harvest or not. I mean, oftentimes growers are looking more for crop diversification at this point. And so you need to view these relationships as evolving and things that you most certainly need to take the best care of. But my main tactic was going to small grain field days. And so mainly the one that Tech puts on out in the Warsaw Extension, the Agricultural Research Center out there. I mean, there's multiple, I think there's 7 or 8 statewide, but the main,
There are 14.
14, excuse me. I guess only 7 grow grain. And so what is helpful there is that you're going to get a wide array of folks, and if they come prepared, it will be obvious where they are. They will come with their garb on, and they will come with some sort of agenda, and they're listening as much as they are asking questions or talking. And so you can essentially kind of plant a seed of need, and sometimes find that they will come to you because they perhaps didn't make it publicly known that they were interested in growing small grains, because why would they when corn was $18 a bushel or whatever. But you can take that model and move it into sub-local areas. So like talking to the farm bureaus or extension services and figuring out where small gatherings can be. Just showing up will get you about 80% of the way there. And so
it does seem to be a rather challenging way for people to get into this business, is that you just have to work so hard to find your business partners, right? Rather than that database already being prepared, something accessible is one of the things we're attempting to try to do, is to make that connection a little bit easier for people so that they don't have to drive themselves crazy searching for what's out there, but just not advertised. So,
and I think you have to realize, I mean, when I was starting to set my build this network of mine, it was just on the heels of that Osage biofuels plant bankruptcy. And for folks that did not know the details of that, perhaps Timmy does, is that Osage contracted and then took delivery of hundreds and thousands of tons of grain and then didn't pay anybody. And so they took delivery of the grain and then went bankrupt. And so these growers could not move that grain into a secondary market. They essentially ate crow. Aside from Purdue coming in and I believe buying up the large amount of that, me showing up at a small grain field day and be like, hey, I'd be looking for 30 to 50 acres of grain, and we're going to pay this premium. And they, for all intents and purposes, kind of laughed me out of the room, because it's like, yeah, well, that's what Osage said. And I can't really, I mean, you can't really battle back from that. But you have to understand, there are going to be conditions that you have no control over, and push on, and then there are going to be others that you do have control over, and that is trying to meet growers where they are in terms of acreage they're looking for, varieties they're looking for, and trying to see where you can fit into their
Yep. You bring up a very good point. We're going to put a pin in that for just right now, because we're going to come back to that. So at the moment, since we talked on partnerships, we touched on that. Let's go to one side of the scale where we're speaking specifically to the grain growers and grain sellers here. So just a bit of a behind the scenes look. So many of you might be familiar with that British TV series Clarkson's Farm. And if you aren't, then I seriously suggest that you run home, make a giant bowl of popcorn, and then just binge watch through the entire series. But one might say that the program is less a primer on how to start a farming business and more of a comedy of errors. It's sort of like a what not to do mockumentary for newbies, right? So I wanted to touch on with Matthew and Timmy to maybe turn and ask either one of you or both of you if you've had any surprise obstacles, maybe not to the size of like Jeremy Clarkson surprises, but any obstacles or two that showed up in your path along the way for you as you were first working to produce or to market or to distribute grains as a farm business, something that maybe you wished you would have been schooled on earlier or somebody would have given you the heads up about.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Just having a big enough cleaner, just dealing with Mother Nature in general. I think that has Mother Nature has thrown so many curveballs in my direction, and I'm sure with Timmy as well. Just trying to battle to make quality products, and I wish somebody would have told me, hey, it's going to be all right. If it's not raining in March or April, it's going to come. Everything's going to be fine.
Have you seen Clarkson's farm?
I haven't seen Clarkson's farm.
You got to see Clarkson's farm. Yeah, just so that you know exactly what it is I'm talking about. The most odd, horrific. I mean, there's a guy who just raced cars for a living, and very expensive cars, and then somehow decides to buy a farm in the Cotswolds, right, with a lot of money. And so, I mean, we know that we think of farming as a very serious business, right? There's a lot of investment, and a Lamborghini tractor isn't just going to show up on your porch as a gift from anybody. And it requires an enormous amount of skill. My question for you is there space here for people who want to do it on a much smaller, like a micro scale? Or if they want to, if they've not been handed the reins down from a family generational farm, if they want to do it as a side business, can they participate in this market? Your opinions? Well, we need a mic because we're taping this.
I'll tell you how I started. Maybe this will give you an idea. When we first started delivering to Becky and Scott, we didn't have nothing. We was just winging it. We grind the rye for Becky and Scott. I was putting the rye in a tub after we grind it. Had a set of platform scales in a bucket, and we would take a bag, and we would till we got 50 pounds. Then we borrowed a sewing machine and we sewed it up. Till we got whatever we need to carry up there. We're doing a little better now. we're a little bit automated now, but that's how we started. We didn't have nothing. We were just kind of, finding our own way, trying to stumble along and do what we could. But we didn't have a big investment in the beginning. So yeah, I would say, anybody can, if they want to hard enough, can come up with something. If they have good people to work with, like we did with Scott and Becky, they, definitely helped us along the way. Give us some leeway on some things, and it worked out well, I hope.
Working great. I would not want to farm. People ask me all the time, and I'm like, I have a very good farming partner who understands the business of farming, and I see my role as a customer as to be looking out for his interests. If he's not making money, we're not going to be working together, right, very long. And so I think the best, I personally look at it as, every time we try a new varietal, it's how is it in the field? How is the yield? How are those things? The flavor, I can taste it. We get, but I'm not seeing any, issues with flavor in negative ways. So I'm like, what's best for you? Because I want a long-term partnership. And if I just wanted to go with what's cheapest or whatever, I could have been doing that, but I wanted better than that. And so I think that's really the partnership that I look for. And I think that, you know, if you be a good partner, you can build lasting relationships.
I mean, just to add, I would say the farming aspect is probably pretty hard to get into, if not impossible. Nowadays, it's unfortunate if it's not passed down. If you don't have something started or major deep pockets, it's going to be almost impossible to get into. But if you do, you know, if you have a little bit of land and some equipment to start with, I think from the distilleries, I will say what has been really nice is they want quality. You don't have to go out and grow 500 acres. They don't want, like, it's not a Purdue or a Tyson where they want bulk. You know, they want quality, so you don't have to go out. You can plant 10 acres if it's great quality. Like, they will be very interested. So I will say, like, there's room for that. The farming side is just it's unfortunate now. It's very hard to start.
Yeah, I've heard statistics lately about how the larger ag farms are swallowing up these small farms, and that they're just disappearing year by year. That percentage is just growing as far as like small family farms are disappearing. Now, from the distiller's perspective, you know, I hear a lot from farmers who I'm interacting with these days saying we just don't grow enough to even play within that distillers market, so we're not going to try. So, you know, Dave or Jeff, you know, do you guys have anything to add here as far as like, are you okay with using farms that don't fit your entire grain bill need?
Look, it's just like the story and how we found Matt. It's, you have to diversify because there's going to be some things that are just out of your control. Right, and so you have to have relationships with a number of farmers. Otherwise, I mean, because for us, we try to plan out our production, you know, at least a year in advance. And if you miss that grain at some point, well, then it really kind of throws everything off. And not just then, but like in 5 years, you know, is when things are supposed to be ready. So, you know, working with a number of farmers who maybe don't fill the entire bill for the year is important. You need to have that. You know, always should be working on that. And we do that not just with farming, but with everything, like all of our supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's called a network for a reason. I mean, we purposely contract in 6, 7 different parts of the country for Mother Nature reasons. So it would be moronic of me to place all of our grain acreage in one basket and then have a week of rain in June, and then I would quite literally not have a business, or I would at least need to completely abandon the primary ethos that we have at M&R in order to keep the doors open. And so you should not be seeking out people that are going to push you beyond your means. And then I have plenty of things to say here, but I think generally speaking, I mean, one rule, not everybody's your customer. So this took me 4 or 5 years to really come to terms with, but it's a very comforting mantra to have when you are allowed to select your customers too. So you can choose who not to work with and who you really want to work with, and you can work those people particularly hard. And oftentimes it's, if you can take your ego out of it, it has much more to do with what their ethos is and what their values are and what they're trying to achieve that match yours, and then the relationship kind of happens on its own. It's you know, in breweries, when all they want to do is get on a Kroger shelf, that's ego. If you ship a bunch of free beer to Bonnaroo because you want to get into the, you know, musician's tent, that's ego. If you build a $500 million distillery and then nobody really understands why, that's ego, right? And so you need to, if you can accept the fact that not everybody's your customer because they can't be anyways. I mean, let's be honest. It allows you to focus on things that are going to continue the storyline of your business, which is what you really need. And then just one quick thing, I would say, because it is difficult from a small scale perspective, just manage expectations. So when you're talking to a particular buyer, if you're a grower, just get on the phone and talk through how grain is going to move from one end of this scenario to the other. And I'm talking like how you get it in the field, how you get it out of the field, where it goes from the combine, how it's getting out of the gravity wagon, what you're putting it in, coming out of the gravity wagon, into totes, into a bin, how are you getting it clean. If you can verbally walk yourself through this stuff, you're managing expectations, but then you're also identifying bottlenecks and trip points together, and so now there's no surprises. Now there's no, oh, I didn't know you wanted these in 50-pound bags. I only have them in a 30 bushel bin. I guess we should have talked about bags. And so I think dumbing it down to really like how stuff is moving from your dirt to their raw materials location can really help all of the above.
Well, before you put that mic down, I'm just going to have you go further with this, because you bring up a good point about managing expectations. And when we're talking about being the customer or being the buyer, you brought up a good point a couple of weeks ago, which was, well, what if you decide you want to be both? Right? You take out all the questions. You take out all of that nervousness, that anxiety of like, what can I expect? Because Jeff, you were like, well, there's the option of being both farmer and distiller, right? Estate distillery, or farmer and baker. Then you know all those parameters fall on your own shoulders.
Being your own end user. Yeah.
Right. So did you want to add anything more about that, as far as like the difficulty of that or the success rate people have that you've come across?
I mean, not terribly much to say. I mean, it is the same in the craft maltsters arena. I mean, I'm probably in the minority, being someone who is not. Many craft maltsters evolved out of family farms because they were looking to be their own end user in some case, because it insulates them from market volatility and so on and so forth. But I guess I would just say one thing going in is that your list of responsibilities has just doubled, if not tripled, and so.
Quality control is probably increased, right?
So, I mean, if you can have a come to Jesus with yourself around the amount of work it's going to take you to do the one thing, now cut the time that you have to do that in a third and decide to become a farmer, or decide to become a brewer and or a distiller. And so when you come out of that, then you will go, oh, I need more humans to help around here. And now you have an HR question to answer, right? And so the belief that you can be your own end user all by yourself is a suicide mission. I built and ran the malt house by myself for 2.5 years, and gave myself walking pneumonia. I fell off 30-foot ladders onto the concrete floor. I fell off cleaners by myself at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. Like, there were multiple times where I was like, this is where my wife's gonna find me. And it is dangerous stuff to try to burden yourself with all of these things to do because you're trying to play it safe, or you're trying to play this smarter move. You just have to be calculated about it, and put in place the things that you need to remain sane. I mean, it's just like when you're a new parent, for the parents in the crowd, you're doing your kid no good deed if you don't sleep, right? So you're not doing anybody any favors if you're, a walking zombie and fall off and kill yourself, fall off something and kill yourself, and now here we are, right? So just, you have to, if you're gonna try to overburden yourself, you gotta bring some help in.
Point well taken. A lot of education required to be on either end of that spectrum. And, for a lot of folks here, I think we all understand the benefits of belonging to an organization like CGA for support, right? So that you're not the only person doing it or the only person seeking answers to your questions. And then also for education and for the opportunities of community. And certainly if you aren't aware of the benefits, well, we've got Madeline Smith here, the executive director of CGA, so bend her ear or she will bend yours later on so that you can become a member too. I'd love to turn to Becky here and have you chime in on the role of, what national guilds and associations have had, what sorts of effects they've had on education as far as like what's available for farmers or distillers or any grain users and whatnot, and where people might be able to access training and classes.
Yeah, I personally am I do a lot with the American Craft Spirits Association. That for me personally, I have found it invaluable in connecting with my peers and honestly putting together things that are happening all over the country in little isolated patches, but you can then say, oh my goodness, so-and-so needs to know about this, right? You meet somebody who's doing, a similar grain study in Minnesota, and you're like, oh, great, that's great, we have one here. There's pockets of stuff, and connecting that is sometimes the hardest part. And so one of the things I find really valuable on my own part is just keeping my ears open as we get together at our annual convention and finding out what's going on. Going to the state guilds meeting, a lot of times you find out what's going on somewhere else that could be so useful. For example, the Virginia Spirits Board, when that went through at the national convention, there was an incredible number of people coming up and saying, how did you do that? What is the step, right? So what kinds of grains are available? What kinds of studies have been done? What are the varietals that they might have here that, you can connect people with, that you can save steps if you know who's doing what and how to put those things together. So I just personally, it's always an investment to belong to an association because you have to get time and money to be part of it. But I have found that those investments in it really pay off because of the amount of information that you have connections to. And that's why I find, being both members of state and national associations be so valuable for this kind of thing.
Yeah, having those sources for education obviously is crucial. And since we have an audience of, grain purveyors here who might be a little unfamiliar with the distilling and brewing or malting industry, let's further arm them with a little bit of success and ask our folks here, what you all are seeking when it is that you are looking at the grain's quality parameters, right? In other words, Jeff and distillers, what factors are you considering when you're purchasing your grain? So Dave, you want to give a start?
Well, like any business, and it's been touched on, the economics of it, obviously, if it's not affordable to us and we can't get an ROI, then it's kind of a non-starter. Certainly there are times that we will do something that you can kind of like factor under marketing, if you will. Certainly we have some Bloody Butcher corn that we have in barrel that we paid X amount for to help a friend out. That was just going to be a specialty bottling and more for marketing, not necessarily to be part of like what the business is. But the economics are hugely important. But for us, I think that there's kind of the main things that matter are obviously you got to have quality, but more importantly, you need a farmer that recognizes quality, stores the grain appropriately, is available, communicates, reliability, because there's always going to be something that comes up. And you have to be able to have that dialogue and relationship with. So it's sometimes can be less about the grain and more about the person that's buying it. You kind of, if you're in business with them, you can already make the assumption that like, well, that grain is of a quality and price that at least fits the business. And then you start adjusting away from there as to like, okay, well, what does the flavor look like? I mean, certainly some cases flavor does come in, but again, those are off the beaten path from what the core business is. You got to have your bread and butter, right?
Becky?
I would say story is obviously something, right? You're telling stories, but ultimately, you know, I just remember when we first started this and someone said, you know, what business are you in? And Scott was like, well, whiskey business. He's like, no, you're in the relationship business. At every level, you're in relationships. You're in relationships with your customers, you're in relationships with your suppliers, and being the right kind of, making sure that you have a quality relationship. You know, nobody got into this business to work with nasty people. So you want to make sure you're not a nasty person, and you want to find the right people to work with.
Jeff, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so but was the original question around like grain quality parameters for purchasing? Okay,
Yep.
so maltsters are kind of a pain in the butt in this department. But also some of that stuff is kind of overblown. I can tell you one thing, protein is not number one, which they make it sound like it's protein or, you know, this perfect protein number or die. And frankly, that's the most forgiving spec I run into. There are lots of things we can do with high protein grain. It's frankly better to have high protein than low protein for reasons I can explain offline. But so mainly, you know, we are maltsters, so we are tricking grain into growing. I literally watch grass grow for a living, so germination rates are very, very important. So we're typically looking for 95% germination or above, frankly, because it's impossible for me to do my job if the grain is pieced out, if you will. And then most certainly test weight will always play in. That plays into even on the brewery and distillery side. That is the yield number. You want good extract, and so good test weight means there's enough starch in that particular kernel to extract that starch off, and in the form of fermentable sugars. If there's not enough, if you have low test weight, you know, like thin anemic grains, there's not a lot of fill out, that is extract. So if you don't have a lot of extract, you don't have a lot of good yield. So test weight, and then so germination rates, test weight, sprout damage. So talking about just this particular region is usually up against disease. So Fusarium head blight, because there's a industry spec for that. It is usually one of those two things that knocks things out. Frankly, it's much more frequently sprout damage. And so it's just a brutal reality that we live in. I mean, Matt and Timmy live in it every day. You have absolutely no control over it. There are some tactics you can use that are incredibly expensive if you don't already have them in place, like harvesting early and drying in bins and so on and so forth. But again, sprout damage, if it's sprout damage, maltsters can't use it because when it germinates in the field, it releases the number one enzyme we are trying to cultivate in the malting space. And so if it's already used that up by sprouting in the field, we have nothing to cultivate. And then, like I mentioned, Fusarium head blight, it produces a mycotoxin called deoxynivalenol. I'm sure everybody in this room has heard of it in some shape, way, or form. It's also nicknamed vomitoxin, if you have heard perhaps that term. So the craft beverage space, food and beverage have a tighter spec. It's 1 part per million, whereas like feed, I believe it's 10-ish, which is an astronomically high number. And so that's usually what we're up against. However, the disease is usually because it is sopping wet. And so the disease is probably going to come long after the sprout damage in a particularly bad year. it's oftentimes you get them both in a tandem because one kind of festers the other. So, you know, beyond that, again, protein, not that big of a deal. And I would say, you know, just try to get good plump grain every year to the best of your abilities.
Right.
I want to just add something because Jeff is very articulate on the technical sides, and Becky and I are kind of like, you know, it's about people. But I know, but as farmers, and you may be looking at doing this business, and you're like, well, really, how does it work? And obviously, Jeff's answer is far better. But I'll say a little bit of something about the mentality of a buyer as a distiller. Again, we're in the business of distilling, and I think both Becky and I have implied, like, we're not trying to farm. We're relying on you guys to do that, and our job is to have partners that really know how to do that. You know, but that doesn't mean that we don't know how to look at grain and tell how good it is. And also, we kind of look at it, I think, more from this, or at least I do, on our runs, our starch conversion, what our yield is, our yield of alcohol, obviously flavor, which is a little bit more anecdotal than empirical, things like that. So, you know, we may not have as deep of a knowledge of all the individual components, but we are aware of them. And we may, you know, bring some things in, and we'll look at it a little bit differently from those aspects that I described. But it's important that the grain, when you have a relationship with someone, that you are getting delivered best effort, because we will notice and tell if it's not, and we will just stop using it, is really what it comes down to.
So, like, you know, what would be a test that you do at the distillery door that would be outright refusing that grain shipment? So anybody knows, like, if it comes and it looks like this, it's full of weebles or it's full of whatever. We do these short tests, quick tests.
If it's not clean, if it's full of bugs, yeah, you know, you can do the quick, you know, sniff test and look. There's some of the basic things that you can get from just looking at USDA videos on how to grade grain and spotting, you know, different diseases that are available. But I was having a sidebar with some of these guys up here earlier, and we were talking about, like, you know, relationships and when things go really wrong, and how you learn to assess grain after they go really wrong. And I am still paying the price for a mistake that happened about 7 years ago, where we had some musty grain, that's what we call it, but, you know, aflatoxin or whatever, that kind of got through the process, and our quality control kind of broke down around it. And it was a significant fault in the whiskey, and it slipped out the door and got into Europe, and big problem. Maybe 2% of the product got out in the market, but that 2% just lives on forever. And when I finally kind of tracked down exactly what the cause was, the solution, you know, when I was like, how am I supposed to know how to do this? And the guy goes, well, it's easy. When you receive the grain, you grind about a cup of it, you wet it, you put it in a microwave for 15 seconds, then you smell it, and you will pick up that fault. And I was like, well, how the hell are you supposed to know that? And he's like, by screwing it up. And guess what? It happens to everybody. You're really lucky it happened on a small scale. He's like, I made over 1,000 barrels of stuff with this in the past. And I was like, that's how I learned in the 60s. And I was like, okay. So, you know, it is a great example as you learn kind of tricks, but, you know, this is also an art and a craft, and there's science, and we're always learning. You know, people bandy around the title of master distiller. That's not something you give yourself, and it's not because you're the best at doing something. It's that you've been around long enough and screwed up enough things that you've seen most of what can go wrong. That's a master distiller. And then, of course, how do you handle it when those things go wrong? So, you know, that is an example of, like, you know, I'm sure there will be something else, and I'm sure you guys are also learning as well, too, at times. You know, Matt was able to point out, he's like, yep, I know exactly what happened to your grain. Here's what happened. Boom, bottom of the blower, and people do that, and it happens. So, you know, learn something every day.
It's a perfect transition into the topic of flavor, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and sometimes all in one glass. But I'd like to dive into a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And when we're talking about the sleuth work that we're doing historically on resurrecting some of those old flavors and whatnot, I'm just curious. We can't exclude the fact that we have to focus on what, the bulk of what is currently most available, right? The grains that are most grown, the grains that are most consumed, the grains that are most purchased. But I'd love to hear all of your perspectives on, where flavor is a consideration for you, or if it is at all, right? And where you'd place it in the hierarchy of cost versus taste consideration. So Becky, you want to start on your end?
Yeah, sure. So, there is the story piece of it, which we talked about a little bit, a specific varietal being as part of a story. But I personally tend to look at it more as there's a lot I can do on my end to differentiate flavors even within a single batch, right? I mean, we all know single barrel whiskeys exist for a reason, because sometimes a barrel is just extra good or extra bad, or something else. Maybe 60% of the flavor that you've got in a finished whiskey specifically can be coming out of the interaction of the spirit and the wood. The distillation side, technique matters, how you distill matters, and the decisions you make in doing it. So I think that's why I guess my personal feeling is I stress less about specific varietals unless I'm going to be making it a piece of my story than I do to having just the best flavor and the best quality product that I'm getting in, so that I know I'm not going to have to fight some faults that are coming in on it, but I'm just going to enhance it and look at it different ways. So unless story is a big piece of how I'm figuring this, any particular, grain comes, then it's less important to me. So, that's why I, when we discuss what we're planning, if we want to plant something, if Timmy wants to plant something to try something, and that's great, we try something. But if it isn't great for him, then I'm okay. We move on. We've got some that we can work with, but we don't have to have it. If something comes up, we can try it again. And that's why I really see it as a partnership for us. What I do with it downstream is use my knowledge and the way that I work to make the best possible whiskey out of the raw materials that I'm starting with.
Timmy, what about you? What's your opinion on flavor with grain? You don't know anything? Interesting to note that is not a consideration for you. It's the other factors that you're looking at in your field rather than the flavor component. Yeah, just like, how important is that consideration of flavor for you for your product as you are, choosing what variety you're going to be growing each year?
Well, we've tried several varieties, and I don't know if Becky really doesn't.
There's enough variation. There's enough variation in the distillation process that you can't necessarily pin any one particular flavor to one particular decision. So for me, that's where I work with it. If I decided for story reasons I wanted to be unilaterally, making some Abruzzi or, a particular thing, then that would be, I would work with that and make decisions enhancing that. But I don't work that way. So for me, it's not as big a deal. So that's why Timmy and I work on what's working for him, what's working for me. We kind of find a way to make it the best.
Jeff, how about you? Or sorry, Timmy, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just was going to say, when I plant and grow the rye, I do everything possible to kind of ensure, like you were talking about test weight and all like that. I do the best I can for as fungicides and whatever. Matthew, he cleans my rye for me. I think that all of those things help in what we're trying to do for as flavor, I would think.
Cleanliness matters.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
above almost anything.
Yeah. So other than that, I don't know.
I think it's a kind of a black box. Sorry about It's a kind of a black box that I think it will continue to kind of show itself over time. I mean, if to get down to kind of brass tacks of it all, with small grains, I like hybrids. So like triticale, for instance, tastes unbelievably good in beer and whiskey. And there are and this is a tactic that I am currently trying to flesh out. So I'm not necessarily going to say that I'm right, but for those of you that maybe dork out with small grain variety trials, look at the sisters and cousins around a selected variety. So you have to understand, I mean, they're doing like tens of thousands of crosses to find these varieties, right? And then they, over time, get kicked out for different characteristics. Well, by the time you get to the single one from a 10,000 cross test plot, there are lots of sisters, brothers, and cousins around this particular chosen variety. And it's likely that that particular chosen variety was chosen for the agronomics, because that's what ag universities are supposed to do. They're supposed to provide the best tools to a grower. But the sister varieties may not be, they're probably barely discernibly different. And there may be, you know, some particular trait that knocked it out. Maybe it was test weight, maybe it was maturity time, like it, you know, the chosen variety came out of the field one day before the other. So, I mean, you got to kick them out somehow, right? And so we have noticed some positive flavor impacts by trialing some of the non-named varieties. So, you know, they're usually just the experimental numbers, but, you know, work on the fringes and it's possible that you can find some flavor impacts. And frankly, I'm really just a believer in that flavor is in heritage varieties.
Well, you know, one thing I want to bring up with you specifically, Jeff, is the fact that, you know, you receive these grains and they already have an imprinted flavor profile on them, and then you do this little magic with heat and you actually change their signature, right? So when I talk about you being a master of flavor, you're manipulating flavor into a different direction. And so I'm kind of curious, specifically from you, you know, are you moving along the line of where the consumer palate is going, or are you the guy who's steering the ship for us? It's like, well, I think we're going to kind of play with this.
Honestly, like, I would like to believe that I'm trying, you know, I'm kind of steering the ship. I think one of the upsides of working in the craft beverage space is that the producers are always looking for the next cool thing to latch onto. Yes, many of them can come across as, you know, a bunch of know-it-alls and they know what they want and that's all that they want. But that's very, very much the minority. I mean, there are a lot of folks who are just like, tell me something that I can sink my teeth into, right? And so, you know, in the malt house, we're essentially driving Maillard reactions, which is where we develop flavor off of the kiln, and then there's an entirely different dry roasting process that is really capitalizing on caramelization, and then moving into things beyond that, like pyrolysis and things like that, that controlling bitterness and high roasted grains and so on and so forth. So, you know, I see that as, you know, produced flavor, and there's a lot of levers to pull, and it's a lot of fun. But when it really comes down to it, the coolest flavor is the one that you don't have to make. It is the expression of the agriculture. I mean, some of the most popular European malted grains for brewing are the heritage varieties. So the Barcas, Maris Otter, Golden Promise, these are all variety names, and they all taste a particular way. We make an English pale malt that we have to kiln in a certain way to make it taste like Maris Otter tastes on its own. And so to me, Maris Otter is cooler than my than my English pale. Don't look now, but like Maris Otter is not the greatest agronomically. And so that's why we are oftentimes, if you're looking at like the recommended barley list, malting barley list, it is, you know, again, heavily based on agronomics. And so you're typically trading something off. If you want flavor in the very, very strong agronomic varieties, most of that has probably been, the baby's kind of been tossed out with the bathwater. They've bred out some of the good stuff to get the stuff that agronomically we need for these growers to make money. And so, and to be able to harvest them reliably every year, so on and so forth. So, you know, just kind of like we say in malting that there's no such thing as a flavorful low color malt. Color in malts, the higher your color is, the better it tastes, the bigger the flavor is. There's no such thing as a low color flavorful malt. I don't think there is, you have to be very, very lucky to get a very flavorful, incredibly good agronomic variety. And I think it's just probably, you know, the higher powers playing games with us. But I think that is why there is attention on heritage grains. That's why I love Shelley's project. I hope we can find some here that have malting, you know, potential to them. I can probably bet they're all feed varieties, but I don't care. And so, you know, you kind of got to look on the fringes. You just remember that a lot of the public commercial available stuff is built for agronomics and pretty much agronomics only.
So Matt, would you feel the same as Timmy, that it isn't necessarily a consideration for you, or do you feel differently?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't call it flavor. I would kind of touch on what Becky was talking about, the story. Just to give a little example. So I've worked with 4 malting barleys myself, and then Billy before me, countless varieties. The most recent one that we're working with is Avalon, which was actually named after Billy Dawson, who was the original founder of Bay's Best Feed, because he was so influential in the craft malt world. But then again, like, we're working with that, it still gets screened very hard. It has this great story. Luckily, it's working out great for us. But you know, it still has to meet all the quality parameters. And then on top of that, I'm just going on of what Jeff was saying. They are chosen for agronomic reasons, because we have to remember, you know, barley, maybe not so much nowadays, but definitely in years past was grown for feed, mostly. So, and that's my backup option with having to meet all of these qualities, the 95% germ, the low VOM, all these test weight, like the test weight and the other parameters. I have to have a back outlet for it because 85% germ barley with great test weight does not work for him. And yet when I look at it and when the world looks at it, it's beautiful barley, right? So I have to find a different outlet for it. So I want the yield to be there so we can sell for feed price, you know, and still be able to get through the next year. But definitely flavor, going back to the flavor, it's more of a story. On our end, like I said, I've worked with a bunch of different malting barleys, and with this one named Avalon, it has a great story. It's working out for us. And then we just rely on the malt houses. They kind of lead us in the directions. If there is a more flavor with, let's say, Violetta versus Calypso, you know, they let us know. And we don't have they just let us know these are equal varieties agronomically. We like this one better because this is where we want to go with flavor, so we'll get you to grow these. So that's kind of it entails what it's like flavor from kind of the grower standpoint.
Yeah. I know here at Reservoir, we work really hard to utilize Virginia products and to highlight the fact that all these Virginia ingredients go into making our whiskeys and how prevalent they are in creating this flavor profile of all of our whiskeys. And Dave, maybe you can talk a little bit about how it is that we talk to our consumers about our story, as far as, there are many factors that go into creating the flavor profile of a whiskey, and how for years distillers used to think that grain was not a factor in the contribution of whiskey flavor profile, because they believed that it wasn't going to make it through the harsh distillation process on that production room floor. And we now have studies to prove differently. Dave has always known that that was not true, which is, I think, one of the reasons that he worked so hard to buy Virginia grain.
Yeah, so, the first thing I'll echo is just like a quick catchphrase that supports what Matt and Timmy and Jeff said, is return to capital before returns. So you really need to have that grain be economically viable. Okay, great, fine. And then let's talk about flavor. And really what we do here, and I think it's really important, after you go back there and you look at the setup and how things kind of run through the system, what's actually fascinating is, how do we make something that's even remotely the same each time, because there's so many variables that can go off course at any given time. And to what Becky was saying with, she can correct some things on the back end. I agree in the sense of, if you work with something that's really good to start with and you have this base, there's less correcting you have to do, so it's a little bit more forgiving, and so you do want to have something that really works. Now for us, we make single grain whiskeys. That's what we make all the time. We make 100% corn, 100% wheat, and 100% rye. Okay, and then we can actually combine those and recreate any mash bill that you want after they're done aging. So for us, having a pure note of each grain type is very important, and I think it's a little bit more distinctive to us as to how we choose which grains we want to use, because no matter how you cut it, there is a flavor difference by terroir and also varietal, but it's also about, who can pick it up. Right? Certainly with the single grains, I think it hollers at you a little bit more. But, we have a variety of whiskeys where we have our entry-level whiskeys actually built to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. And so when we're building those kinds of whiskeys, we're looking at flavors and blends of grain to highlight certain things that the grain has, so that it does appeal to a wide variety of people. And then we have very specific things that appeal to a much smaller group of people. So, for us, and again, like with the project that Shelley's doing, which is an extension of how we have always kind of looked at things. And even I would, Becky and I are in a lot of the same markets together. And a lot of times our grains are just grown geographically separately. And you can put our whiskeys side by side, her rye and our rye, they don't taste anything alike at all. And that is a really great example of, guess what? Terroir, varietal, all of that stuff matters a lot. And it just depends on what it is you want to do. It's not to say that our rye is the right way and Becky's is the wrong way. They're both good ways to do it. And it gets back to another mantra that I have around here. It's like, does it taste good? Would you like another? That's kind of really all that matters. And sometimes it doesn't matter what I think about it. What matters is our customers. What did they think about it, right? So it's always exciting to recognize that you have options. Sometimes you make decisions because of economic reasons, but you do have options that you can goose flavor in a number of different ways if you want to, if it is economically viable. And, if we are given that opportunity, guess what? We do that. If we don't have that opportunity, well, we don't. We work with what we have. But certainly we like to chase flavor as best we can.
Okay, so I think we're going to move on. I got to skip ahead a couple of questions because these guys have so much to say. But I want to talk a little bit about future forecasting, right? So it's a touchy subject for some, but one that we are compelled to consider with more and more frequency and interact with, and that is, of course, climate change. So Dave's position on a changing landscape is one I've heard countless times, and it is adapt, migrate, or die. I think it's probably tattoo worthy, but I'm curious to hear, how some of your businesses are being forced to shift and how they're being impacted by things like geomodification, if they are at all. So maybe we'll make our way back down this way.
You want me to talk about geomodification? That is a very big word for me. Sure. Yeah. Is it affecting us right this moment? Yes, tangibly to a point that it's hitting the bottom line. I'm not sure yet, but is it coming? Absolutely, I've seen it. And I'll tell a very quick story of Shelley and I were both over in Italy, and we went to a Poliziano winery, really beautiful winery outside of Cortona. And we were lucky enough that they gave us a private tour of their facility. And the neat thing is they've been making wine, I believe, since about the late 1970s kind of thing. And what they did is they showed us, they're like, okay, look at the wines and look at the ABV on the wine. And over that period of time, with all the reference bottles they had in the cellar, you can see the ABV of the wine slowly moving up. And what that is representative of is the growing seasons are a bit hotter, the fruit grows a little bit quicker and smaller, and it, as a result, has a higher sugar content, and then it creates a higher alcohol by volume count in the final wine. That is one of the first really empirical, in-your-face examples of climate change in our industry that I have seen. So I have started looking at it with regards to what we have. We're lucky in the sense that small grains can have a couple of growing seasons. But certainly I imagine that starch contents and things are going to start shifting on us. It's something that I'm very aware of, but I just have not seen something really move the needle yet. But I am going to wager that these guys probably have.
I would say not diving into like just statistics and seeing changes. The two probably biggest things we see, and Timmy can probably touch more on this, that I've seen, are more extreme weather events, that we don't get 2 inches of rain anymore, we get 4 inches. That seems like it happens quite often. That's kind of as a whole crop production wide, not just affecting small grains. And that could be detrimental, pretty much any time during the growing season, especially late when it comes to small grains. When around harvest time, if you get a rain event like that, it can be catastrophic. The other thing, most particularly to small grains, is, and this is how I feel, I think our late winters and early springs are mixing a little too much, more than we would like. Problems that causes is the warm Februaries. As a crop production as a whole, weeds get growing faster and they're harder to combat as they get a head start. And also your small grains grow a lot faster. And then, that can be fine. But what the other end of that is, and what we have seen firsthand in the last 5 years, are the late frosts. So if you get a mix of, if you have a warm up in February or March and your barley or your wheat, rye gets growing, and the head starts leaving the ground, and then we get a May frost, I know a lot of farmers who have quit raising small grains because of a late May frost. It will kill the plant, and you'll get maybe 40% of your yield if you're lucky. So those are two big things for me. Especially the one, combating small grains. We are very worried in April and May of the late frost that seems to be happening more often and later. So those are just a few observations I've seen.
Good ones. Yeah, we lost we lost I think 25 acres of barley in like 15 minutes. That was it 2020. Yeah, Mother's Day. Was that 2020? I don't remember. Well, no, that was pre-COVID. The world's on fire. So these are all great. I will add to one that I've noticed. Our lack of a winter here makes bugs completely unmanageable. So we stuck our neck out and we bought a 40-foot shipping container, reefer shipping container, just for the purposes of freezing truckloads of grain at 0 degrees for 7 to 10 days. That doesn't even work. I mean, it gets it like 95% there. You let that grain sit for another 4 or 5 months, and those devilish things will start to replace themselves. And so I was just telling a grower on Friday, it's like, if this continues, we're gonna have another brutal year of bugs. And we've been running we ran that reefer week in and week out after harvest last year, and it's just completely unmanageable. Speaking on like more of a 30,000 foot level, one thing that I find interesting is that when I started trolling the Craft Maltsters Guild forum back in like 2012, 2013, when there was like 12 of us or something in that guild. I remember a well-known breeder out west saying, malting barley is only spring barley. Like winter barley is like, like what is this stuff? And he just bred winter barley. He just released a commercial variety of winter. Like, go figure. And the reason that they needed to do that is because they need to adjust to climate change. And so they are starting to look at the breadbasket of America is starting to look at winter varieties. And so I think to a certain extent, and I don't want this to come across as a positive because it's going to sound like one, the climate change, I believe, has instilled some level of hope that small grains can be grown east of the Mississippi, which, less than 10 years ago, people were like, no, this stuff is not for you. But that tanked, other industries. I mean, there was a reason there weren't craft maltsters before 2010. We didn't have, Billy Dawson grew Endeavor as the first, possible malting quality variety of winter barley that could grow in our region. And now we have, 4 or 5 viable options. They're not all like the greatest, but we probably have 2 varieties plus Avalon, like our own 2-row malting barley now. And I mean, these are massive shifts. We went from, no, you can't have this, you're east of the Mississippi, to hold my beer. We've got what we need. And so I think at least if there is some sort of upside, it is that it has forced people to get out of this long-held belief that certain things only come from certain places, always and forever. You can argue all you want. I mean, it's just like the terroir argument. I mean, there are people that really, truly believe this is like, it's not a thing. And just like I agree with Dave, flavor is subjective. You might pick it up, the guy next to you may not. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so if there is an upside, I think we are getting some of the geographic shift that is allowing people to actually start to believe that we can do this equally, if not better, in our neck of the woods.
Timmy, how about you? What are you noticing?
I agree with everything Matthew just said. What's your name? Yeah, Jeff too. I like what Jeff said. Just touching on small grain in my area, maybe Matthew might agree or disagree. Small grain is becoming almost non-existent because of the factors you just said. You know, the frost is definitely one. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, people were cutting wheat and they wasn't getting the yields they expected, and everybody has yield monitors now. But you cut around the edge of the woods and the yield would go up. And that's totally opposite of the way it should be. But what it was is the wood edge protected the wheat from the frost, so we didn't lose it. Barley, I don't know anybody. Y'all grow barley, but I don't know nobody grows barley.
Very few.
Very few. Wheat is almost non-existent because of government paying for cover crop.
Yeah.
So small grain is taking a beating right now. Rye, the global warming part, as far as the frost and all, isn't quite as bad because rye has a longer growing period. So it's kind of, out of that window when it starts heading. But yeah, I definitely see it where it's affecting what we're doing. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it is more extreme. That's, we used to, when we started, we used to use a lot of we used to just use water for cooling the stills and mash tank. And we spent a lot of money on water. And now finally we got a chiller because it just was so warm in the summer that you would just take forever to bring your temperatures down. And so, honestly, it's save us money in the long run, but it definitely changes things, and you notice it.
Okay, so that we can be considerate of your time and everything like that, we are going to wrap up things here. I just want to give Dave 60 seconds to tell all of you a little bit about the Virginia Spirits Board grant project and the funding that is available to any or all of you, that pot. So 60 seconds or less. Here we go.
I can make it really fast. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Atkins. She's out in the audience. She's drinking out of the bottle of water right there in the center. Jennifer, raise your hand. Come on. Jennifer works at VDAX, and she's the liaison for the board to Department of Ag, and works very closely with the board. And I would not have been able to do anything at all without her. And she manages the entire grant process as well. But a quick note on the grants: when we legislated the funding for the board, it's just really simple. We take a percentage of the Virginia ABC excise tax, and we take that and we put that into a pot of money that then goes to the board, and the board has a marketing agency that it hires to basically develop Virginia as an appellation, if you will. So 2/3 of the money goes to that. Well, 1/3 goes to research and education grants. And Shelley described a grant that she has that is really great, fits right perfectly in the mold. And then we do things where VCU, Virginia Tech have different grain studies or are buying equipment to develop lab facilities at the universities to train students. The students would then come into the industry after that. So they're all really great programs that are designed to support the industry and all the other industries that are part of it. And this is why we have maltsters and farmers on the board as well. We're all integral to one another. And also, what we don't have here, but we do have a member on the board, is the forestry agency as well. You can see these barrels down here. Like we'll go so far as take down trees in Virginia and air stack the staves and then send them down to the cooper and have barrels made. So that's how vertically integrated we trying to answer what does Virginia taste like. But these grants and programs are all things that you guys may have a project that you've been thinking about doing, but didn't have the money for it, and this may be a place that you could submit and possibly get some money to make that project come true. So, Jennifer.
Okay, so just a quick second or two to open it up to Q&A. Does anyone have a question they'd like to pose that we didn't actually go over? Yes.
Jim, right? Sorry. Oh, yeah.
Jeff.
You
incentivize farmers. So if you look at it this way, I'm essentially paying farmers not to grow corn and soybeans or wheat. And so I'm paying those prices for barley. I guess the part that makes me feel better about it is that I get to like judge Matt every time he sends a grain quality report. Like I get to look at him, they're like, oh, you're like, you only had like 53 pound test weight this year on your 48 pound per bushel barley or whatever. But so we just pay higher price per bushel. And it's not, it really truly is because we're trying to pay people not to grow things that they would normally grow. What's helping in that department, and it's not changing the incentive, but is that because trade wars drop soybean prices and gluts in the market cause corn or wheat to go up or down, diversification is now the new game. And so I find it to be a positive being not enormous. I mean, I'm quite small. It doesn't feel like I'm very small, but I'm quite microscopic. We can work in those like 10-acre or maybe even under increments. I mean, we do special release products. Like we'll just do a batch. In that case, I only need like, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 pounds. So we can kind of play into growers diversifying and then giving them a market to just move all of it. And then I'm also not, committing to this truckload of stuff that I'm not entirely sure I can sell a truckload of yet. And so that also allows me to say like, yes, I will pay you what it costs because I'm also not buying a truckload of it, right? So, but yes, it's really just to bluntly answer your question, it's just a bushel price incentive, yeah.
Anybody else? Question? Yep.
This isn't a question, but is also another grant opportunity I wanted to bring up and make sure people are aware about, particularly because we spent the morning looking at some of the other infrastructure that's needed to make this supply chain work. But there's a program that will be announced soon in Virginia, the Regional Food Systems Infrastructure Grant Program. So it's a USDA program where they're giving each of the states a pot of money to invest in food systems infrastructure specifically. So processing infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, value added, those are the things that pot of money wants to support. So I've been waiting. I look every single week to see if Virginia has dropped their request for applications yet. They have not. They will have $6 million around to be sub-granting out. I believe up to $100,000 or $200,000. We don't know yet because the specifics of the program haven't been announced, but you won't need any match dollars for that amount. And then up to $3 million, you can get a grant up to $3 million, but then you'll start having to put some skin in the game with match. So if there's some things that you saw this morning that you're like, wow, I could really use some, grain cleaning equipment or grain silos, like that is an opportunity to be looking at and to be aware of. Maryland has already dropped their requests for applications that are due in about a month. From the Common Grain Alliance perspective, I'm really interested in trying to make sure that some of that money gets invested in the regional grain supply chain. So I would love to be a thought partner if anyone wants to think about how to apply for those funds, or if Common Grain Alliance can support your application in any way, please reach out to me. So.
What's the title of it again?
The Regional Food Systems Infrastructure Program. So it'll be RFSI is like the acronym for it. And yeah, still waiting for Virginia to put out their request for applications. It's unclear if they will be granting out all of the money this year or if they'll be kind of like multiple windows for funding. So it's definitely something to be thinking about because it's unclear whether it will be offered in future years.
I assume that the CGA website will have a notification, some sort of.
Yeah, we'll send out some information.
Okay, great. All right. If you aren't a member, become a member. Heads up. Any other questions with last call? Because otherwise, yeah.
Thank you all. I've gotten so much information. I really appreciate it, but I have a question, suggestion, open to anybody. You've all brought up so many great points. I believe it was you who commented and said it's really hard to get into the farming business. Yes, it is, but every single solid day, I work with young black and brown farmers, or people who want to become farmers, who ask me to teach them how to do these things. Some of you are just distillers, some of you are growers of distillers. Have you ever thought about reaching out to some of these local community gardens, like myself, saying, first of all, will you grow grain for us? Even if it's on a small scale, collectively, grow this grain, I will buy it from you. It's an incentive to them to help fund their community gardens, which many times are done out of our own pocket. Second, these youth who are showing up in these places just begging to be taught, and they don't really care what they are growing. They want to learn to grow. They want access to land. If you have access to land and you say, hey, I want to teach you how to grow this grain because this is what I need for my business, come, I will teach you. Here you go. They will come in flocks and droves to learn from you what you are looking for because they value that. They want to go back to the land. So it's building those relationships. I think you said that, Becky, about building relationships, putting some time and effort into relationship and community. Just wondering if you have thoughts or like suggestions, or if any of you are interested, because I will be glad to give you the names of 20 people in your area who are young, who are ready to roll. They're just looking for somebody like you to teach them. Tell them what you want.
Thank you for that. I think it's incredibly valuable to know, and I think we'll all just keep that in our back pocket for when it might become of use to us. But we'll spread the word on your behalf as well, okay? So I'm just going to say, tidy everything up, say thank you to all of our panelists. I think we covered a lot of topics here today. We could have covered more, but everyone's getting itchy for a drink and some time to network. So these guys up here, they're going to be milling about, no pun intended, afterwards, so that you can pick their brains and learn a little bit more. I'd also like to say a heads up and thank you to Pete Sisti of Greater Richmond Grains, who many of you participated in his grain cleaning workshop this morning. And if you haven't and you have questions on that big topic, seek that man. He is one of my favorite farming mentors. And then lastly, a massive thank you to Madeline Smith, our executive director here of the Common Grain Alliance, and her team for their indefatigable work for putting on this little dog and pony show today. We are ever so grateful for your help. Thank you. Now, the bar is open. It's got drinks. And then Mary Allison is in the back there, our head distiller at Reservoir, and she is willing to give anybody who missed out on that first round of tours another very quick tour. Right, and also, if all of you are finished with your chairs, we'd be so grateful if you could maybe just stack them against the wall anywhere, and we will have some room for milling about. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you.